Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Oh, river, I hear you, feel you calling me. Oh, river, who will I be when I reach the sea? Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Oh, river, I hear you, feel you calling me. Oh, river, who will I be when I reach the sea? Who will I be when I reach the sea? Who will I be when I reach the sea? Well, I start just about every day with a to-do list. Usually it is an overly ambitious to-do list, if I'm being honest. Rare is the day when I, in fact, finish with every single item crossed off. And one item in particular that I struggle to do on most days is making time for writing. It's not that writing isn't important to me. I'm so dedicated to it that, well, first of all, every day I put it on the list. And also, every day I collect prompts and story ideas and quotes so that I'll have lots of things to write about when I do write. I'm so dedicated that every day I work on other things and finish other pressing commitments so that I will eventually have a lot of time to write. I'm so dedicated that surely one of these days I'll start writing. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, talks about this, about how hard it is, in fact, to just sit down every day and put your butt in the chair and write. She says, the discouraging voices will hound you. This is all piffle, they will say, and they may be right. What you are doing may just be practice, but this is how you're going to get better. Some of the best writing advice I ever got was from a workshop teacher who once said, take a few minutes and for now, don't write, but just write what you would write if you were going to write. I sometimes feel like I haven't written anything since in all the years since I got that advice, but well, I have written a lot about what I would write if I did write. You might call this the practice of practicing, learning how to practice. The problem is that the finished product we might imagine for ourselves can feel so far from where we're starting. The person we would like ourselves to be too often can feel so far away from the person we see in the mirror every day. The world as we would like it to be can feel impossibly far from what we read in the headlines. The demons of perfectionism stand in the way of writing just as they stand in the way of creative risk-taking in general, which is unfortunate because we know that creating a life for yourself that doesn't yet exist requires some creative risk-taking. In uncertain and anxious times like these, just showing up as your best self every day requires setting aside those discouraging voices that hound us. And just imagining a world of justice and equity and compassion, so often just imagining it means setting aside those voices that tell you your efforts are just piffle. When the demons of perfectionism show up like this, I try to practice the practicing of showing up for myself and for others. Musicians know something about practicing. One of the requirements for all students at Berklee College of Music, where I attended years ago, was 4 semesters of ear training. Now, ear training is learning to sight sing music just by reading the notes on a page, or learning to write down the notes on paper just by listening to a song. And when I began school, I knew that there certainly were people who were capable of this kind of magic, but it seemed like some kind of Harry Potter nonsense to me. Like, you may as well ask me to sit at my desk and turn the desk into a toad using my conductor's baton. It seemed impossible. I remember that first day of ear training class. There was a sort of nervous silence among us students. Well, silence actually, except for one student who was quite vocal in his nervousness. This one student raised his hand and interrupted the teacher in the first few minutes of the very first day to share how worried he was that the class would be too advanced for him. The teacher kindly paused his introductions, and he shared that we had all taken entrance exams and he was sure we'd all been placed in the appropriate class. The teacher tried to continue, but was interrupted again. "Well," said the man, "but is this the very lowest class? Because I need to be in the very lowest class." Now, at this point, you could tell the teacher was a little embarrassed. He looked around the room a little sheepishly, not really wanting to answer that yes, we were in fact a class of the most basic students. "Well, it is ear training 101, he said, so it is the lowest. There is, I guess, a class for people that have previously failed the 101, but you all are just about the lowest." Now, some of the other students in the class giggled a little bit at this man's anxieties. I was actually kind of glad to hear, though, that someone was questioning what felt to me also like the absurd notion that sight singing even could be taught. I don't know what happened next for that student, but he actually never came back to our class. Not because anything we did on that first day was in fact too hard for him, I'm sure of that, but because he lacked a belief that improvement was even possible. I kept going, thinking, well, if generations of students have done this before me, it must be possible somehow, and I made a commitment to at least practice the material. I've always remembered that other student, though, who gave up before he started. It's not just that he didn't try to become a master at ear training, it's that he didn't even try the practicing of it, which always struck me as the real loss. When discouraging voices hound me, I sometimes think of him, and I remind myself that maybe for now, the work I'm doing is just practice. But practice is how I'm going to get better. This pandemic arrived nearly a year ago, and it has been a difficult year to be sure. A time of the ground shifting beneath us constantly. I imagine that the next year, much like the last one, will be a time of learning and relearning new ways of being together, of organizing our days differently all over again, of organizing our people differently all over again. This is a time of adaptation, to be sure, and it is also a time of imagination, a time of asking deeper questions about what we want to go back to, about how much change we can make and how quickly. This is a time calling on those in power, which in some ways is all of us, to play a different role and learn a new tune. I think particularly these are times for white people to re-examine the roles we play in our communities and learn some new skills. A time for listening in deeper ways we haven't always done so well before, and having some hard conversations we haven't yet practiced enough. Fellow white folks, when you hear people of color demanding change these days, now is a good time to practice amplifying those voices that fight to be heard elsewhere by repeating them in calls to representatives and colleagues and family. If you've inherited wealth that was accumulated in a time of segregation, which is true of all wealth in this country, now is the time to practice giving it away. Or if your muscle memory has been to call the police when something goes wrong, now is a good time to practice something different. I won't all of a sudden do all of these things, but I will practice the doing of them. These words from Mickey Scape Jones, as she invites us into brave space. She says, "Together we will create brave space because there's no such thing as safe space. In this space," she says, "we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world and amplify the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. In this space, we call each other to more truth and love." She says, "We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We won't be perfect. The space will not be perfect, but it will be our brave space together." Dear ones, I want to learn how to create that kind of brave space. I want to build the muscle memory for it. Musicians know as well as anyone that muscle memory is very real. We know that consistent practicing changes the very structure of our brains, rewiring our circuitry, forging new connections and new possibilities. No one is born a musician. Musicians are just the ones that learned how to practice. Even songbirds need elder birds to sing to them and teach them their melodies. Practice doesn't make music perfect, but it makes music possible. And so let us practice the practicing of brave space, showing up for ourselves and others to build that new world of justice and equity and compassion. Practice won't make the world perfect, but it makes a better world possible. Someday, I want to be a true expert in justice and compassion. I want to be skillful at creating that brave space even when there's no such thing as safe space. Someday, I want to be masterful at amplifying the voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. And I want to be skillful at speaking more truth and love. Someday, I want to be part of transforming our so-called justice system that has hurt so many so deeply. I want to be part of shifting our education system that fast tracks some to college and others to prison. Someday, I want to be part of transforming our energy sector that's been working overtime to overheat our planet. These are daunting tasks, to be sure. The work we do won't be perfect, but the work we do will be our brave space together. These are daunting tasks, to be sure, and on most days, learning to transcribe a symphony seems more manageable. But that's okay, because for now, we don't have to do all of those things. We just need to practice doing what we would do if we were doing them. So, beloveds, don't promise to be your best self today. Just be the person you would be if you were practicing being your best self. Don't try to rebuild a new world in the image of love this week. Just be the person you would be if you were practicing having committed to such things. You have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We all have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. And so let us start together. Let us grow together. And let us practice together. May it be so. May we make it so. Our offertory music this morning comes from climate justice activist Sarah Lynch Thomason, who's based in Appalachia. This song, like the best songs, and perhaps like the best faith communities, calls us not to look away from the crises of our time, but to face them directly. not to ignore the hard things around us, but to name them and deal with them directly and with courage. It invites us to move forward into the difficult things together. I invite you to sing along. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will walk through the fires when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fire, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fire, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know.